Welcome back. Well, we're done with our course in precision pistol shooting, but the most important part of pistol shooting is actually learning to read your targets, how to analyze what you're doing with your shooting by studying the holes in the paper. It's very simple, and I fired a bunch of targets to illustrate various problems, and these pretty much detail all the problems that you're going to run into. The first one here, now my term for this, I used to call it the soup bowl, because when it's fired on a silhouette target, human, man silhouette target, the shots will all be from about the bottom of the 10 ring, sometimes the bottom of the 9 ring, and then down, and when you stand back and look at it, it looks like it's a soup bowl. Well, that's exactly what this sort of target is right here. You'll notice that all the shots are below the midpoint and they're dispersed downwards and below. Sometimes, many times, you'll have shots off the bottom of the paper altogether or off the side. That tells you immediately that you're doing the first greatest error in handgun shooting, and that's studying your target rather than your sights. In other words, you're gazing at your target, you've got your target in sharp, clear focus, and your sights are blurry. Why are the shots low? The shots are low simply because with blurry sights and a sharp target, you will lower that front sight out of the way to see the target more clearly. It's just a natural phenomenon. You're always going to lower that front sight to see the target more clearly, because in your mind you're telling yourself that that target is more important than your sights. So you drop everything out of the way, you leave your rear sight is prominent. So your rear sight is right there, you know that it's underneath the bullseye, but you've dropped that front sight out of the way, and the front sight is not only down and out of the way, but it's wandering around because you really don't care about it. You're only concerned about having that bullseye in sharp focus. So when you see that type of target where the shots are dispersed below the bullseye, below the center point, and left and right, that means that you're not sharpening your sights. Here's another classic one. You notice that all the shots are going, now I'm a right-handed shooter. I was purposely jerking shots. In other words, I was not squeezing the trigger, I was just stabbing at the trigger. And this is what's causing these shots to go down into that 7 and 8 o'clock position. Why does it do that? Because as a right-handed shooter, the wrist turns, my wrist bone turns, it rotates down in that direction. So when I pull the trigger, it's going to pull it down and to the left. Now if you're a right-handed shooter, conversely, it's down and to the right. So if you see that sort of target, you're jerking your trigger perhaps, and if it's a larger bore gun, you're probably flinching. That's a very classic, for a person who's shooting a large bore gun and they're flinching. You better get back to a 22 that's mild shooting and get rid of that demon, because that's going to plague you forever. You're not going to be able to cure that until you wipe it out of your mind. Flinching is the anticipation of a shot, snapping the trigger to get that shot off, to get it out of the way. It's a bad one. It's a psychological problem as much as anything else. Here's one here. The shots are essentially vertically on line with the bullseye, but they're wandering left and right. And I've even got a couple up here. That's a weak handhold. That's basically, you can say that the handgun is not properly bedded in your hand, just as if a rifle barrel and barreled action was not properly bedded in the stock. You don't have a firm enough grip on that gun to maintain control. So as a result, every time the shot goes off, it wiggles the gun over to one side, then you adjust it and it wiggles it over to the other side, and you're always constantly readjusting your hand because you're not maintaining a good firm grip and it's inconsistent. So your shots are going left and right. Vertical is controlled by having that hand hold up into the web of the hand. So it's not going high and low, it's just going left and right. And because it's shifty, it can also throw shots a little bit high, because sometimes you readjust your hand and it doesn't fall into the same place. So that's important when you're precision shooting, is to always acquire a good consistent grip, and don't change that grip until that particular stage is over. Well, here, this one here looks pretty good. The gun's well sighted in. This is what perhaps an intermediate shooter will start seeing on his targets, and it'll put a smile on your face. But you say, gee, I just can't. Every time I go the line, and I go back to the target, and I got one of these things down in here, and I always have a bad shot that spoils the group. That right there is what's called a good shooter not paying attention to his last shot follow through issue. I see that. I can tell you from personal experience. That blew a match for me many years ago, back in the 70s. I had all my shots in the 10 ring and the X ring, and I threw one out into the 8.5 ring. It was way out, and it was in that same place. I knew as soon as I let it go, I knew exactly what I had done. I didn't follow through. I knew that I had just let the gun off, and I was so glad that I could tell my shots were just going off one after another. I was calling my shots. I had gone through a course of 59 rounds, and on my 60th shot, I just let it go, and I came in second place runner-up that day. And I kicked myself for a long time, because it was an important match, and it was a state match and everything. But that's what happens to a lot of experienced shooters when they don't pay attention to that last shot and follow through cleanly. So pay attention to it. Finally, this is a classic target that you might see if you're a two-handed shooter. Because two-handed shooters I fired this with two hands at 50 feet. Two-handed shooters will very frequently think that because they're shooting two hands, they can get lazy and just stab at the trigger. That stabbing at the trigger will do the same thing that it does with one hand. It's just that it's not quite as pronounced, because you do have that additional support. But it's throwing your shots, and it's also pulling them down off the middle of the bullseye. That's the same gun. It's sighted in exactly the same. I endeavored to do everything I possibly could, but I purposely stabbed at the trigger. As I see sometimes, I see instructions on YouTube where people who are instructing are teaching people to stab at that trigger. That's what's going to cause that. Now, you'll get away with that on a steel plate at 10 paces or 15 paces, but you're not going to get away with that when you're shooting precision shooting with a two-handed hold. You're not going to get away with that if you've got a handgun and you're trying to take out an antelope with your Thompson Center single-shot handgun. You're not going to get away with it then. You've got to be able to, even if you're using two hands for support, you've got to be able to squeeze it, and let it go. And don't think that two hands is going to give you some sort of alibi that you can stab that trigger. Well, so we've gone through all the basics. I taught you the entire course. I hope that you can learn from this and gain great proficiency as a shooter. Tell your friends about this series. I hope to spread the word so that we have some better shooting than what I'm seeing sometimes. I'm very disappointed when I go to the range and I see all kinds of bad mistakes going on, and I just know that they're not getting correctly instructed. And very frequently the instruction that you're going to receive in a lot of courses is defense shooting minded. That's perfectly great to learn how to shoot defensively and things like that. But engaging targets like that, engaging silhouette targets, and shooting with that particular type of skill that's not going to translate well to precision shooting, to being able to, you know, hit that 2-liter bottle down at 25 yards away or 50 yards. What I've just taught you should be able to advance your skills markedly in a way that you've never shot before, hopefully. And if you're a brand new shooter, take it to the bank. Everything I've taught you is exactly what I've done all my life as a distinguished NRA shooter. So thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, hit that button and do so. God bless.